Good evening, my friends. This is Paul, and today I'm going to be reviewing 3D Classics Kid Icarus for the 3DS eShop. Now, this is kind of an odd title because you'd think that the name of the game would come first, like Kid Icarus 3D Classic Edition, or something like that, but maybe Nintendo was just desperate to advertise that you've got your favorite NES games now in full 3D. Anyway, 3D Classics Kid Icarus was originally given as a free game to those who pre-ordered Kid Icarus Uprising. Now it sells for about $6 in the eShop. I was one of the unfortunate souls that bought the game without the free download code from Kid Icarus Uprising. So I figured, well, might as well figure out where Pit's been from and his legacy and whatnot, because Kid Icarus Uprising is one of my favorite 3DS games. Well, Kid Icarus is a very different type of platformer than you're probably used to if you've played a lot of Mario and Donkey Kong. For one, it's not really so much a platformer as it is a platformer shooter. If it seems reminiscent of Metroid, that's because it is. In fact, one guy was doing all the work on the original game before the Metroid team took pity on him and started helping him out, because they were making Metroid at the time. They said, well, let's make the game a little bit more interesting. In fact, there are even Metroid enemies that you can encounter, except they're not as deadly. So, which is kind of a rarity for most NES platformers, Pit actually has a life bar, he can attack with his bow, and the levels have a tendency to scroll upward. Now, there are some side-scrolling levels, but primarily the game was all about vertical ascent. There are also dungeons that you could fully explore, albeit only in a side-scrolling manner. And the game also had some really cool boss battles where if you collected enough hammers in the main game, you could break open the statues in the dungeons and that would give you centurions. Admittedly, they're, for the most part, pretty useless, but they're at least useful enough where if you know how to maneuver Pit, then that in turn has a strategy for how the centurions move, and then you can get a couple of easy, cheap hits on the bosses before you have to take them on your own. Now, there are shops that you can spend your hearts on. Yes, this game has a very counterintuitive way of presenting hearts as not recovery tools, as in Zelda, but money that you use at the shops to buy helpful items that you can use to offset the game's difficulty. Granted, the game gives you no explanation as to what you're actually buying, and a few times I couldn't even make out what it was that was in the shop. Now, the more obvious items are cheaper, but oftentimes if you save your hearts, you can get these uber powerful items. But again, guesswork is required. You really don't know what they do unless you look in a manual or something like that. So, overall, Kid Icarus is the type of game that requires a lot of memorization. If you're going to go through the dungeons, you need to figure out the optimal way of getting through. Otherwise, this game becomes quite the chore. Especially when you get to the eggplant wizards, which may go down in history as the most annoying enemy in gaming. Not because they're particularly hard to defeat, but because if they hit you with their projectiles, they turn Pit into an eggplant, meaning that all he can do is run and jump until he finds a hospital inside a dungeon, which I found is one of the most annoying mechanics in retro gaming history. So, my overall opinion of the 3DS version is that it's a lot prettier than the NES version that my best friend happens to have on Virtual Console. Now, due to the transition, a lot of the passwords that people of the NES era really liked are unfortunately no longer permissible. So the whole, Medusa fights Icarus code to give you unlimited lives, sorry, but it doesn't work. Thankfully, the 3DS version benefits from some of the additions that the Famicom version had over the NES, including multiple save slots and the ability to allow Pit to fire his bow faster, as well as to have the ability to slow the descent of his fall because he happens to have a pair of wings on his back when you rapidly tap the jump button, making the game's brutal difficulty a little bit offset. But make no mistake, this game is hard. So hard that they actually referenced that in Kid Icarus Uprising, saying that game's difficulty was brutal. Although it is odd that, like I just mentioned in my Donkey Kong review, the game does seem to get gradually easier the further you go along, not only because Pit can gradually earn more attack power the more enemies he defeats, but also because you can increase the size of his life bar, and by the time you get to the final level, you have the 3 sacred treasures, which basically allow you to bypass the main level by flying at the top of the screen. And then the final battle is so stupid easy that it's an insult to the Greek mythology that inspired it. I guess because the game was so hard and unforgiving, and it came out the same year as Metroid, a lot of people skimmed over Kid Icarus because they found it as one of Nintendo's more experimental oddities. But thankfully, Kid Icarus Uprising came along and mostly brought back a dead franchise. So, I would recommend picking up this game if you can handle the intense difficulty curve. Like I said, it also looks a lot prettier because of the new animated backgrounds, and the 3D effect, while it doesn't help the game at all, it does make the backgrounds have a nice sense of depth. It's also a fairly long game by NES standards, although it may be artificially longer because of the difficulty. But either way, you're in for a mildly good time. But I would definitely recommend a Mario, Zelda, or even a Metroid game if you're looking for a platforming experience, because those games at least have tools to help balance it out way more than this one does. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. So until I get around to making the next one, keep the faith, stay epic, and God bless. Bye.